Success is often built on addition, adding more features, more products, more ideas. But the most successful restaurant in human history was built on subtraction. Imagine a world where you have a thriving business, the parking lot is full, and the money is rolling in. Now, imagine taking a sledgehammer to that business, firing your staff, and deleting 90% of what you sell. This is the story of a gamble that shouldn't have worked. This is the story of how being boring became a billion-dollar strategy. This is the deep, forgotten history of the first McDonald's menu. To truly understand the menu, we have to go back to 1940. California was the land of dreams, car culture, and the open road. Richard and Maurice McDonald, two brothers from New England, moved west with one goal: to get rich. They tried the movie business but failed. They tried a small hot dog stand in Monrovia, and it gave them a taste of the food industry. But in 1940, they opened something bigger: McDonald's BBQ. At this time, it wasn't a fast food joint. It was a classic drive-in. In the 1940s, drive-ins were the peak of cool. You didn't walk into the restaurant. You sat in your shiny Ford or Chevy, and a car hop, usually a young woman on roller skates, would come to your window. It was social, it was flashy, and it was incredibly inefficient. The first menu was anything but boring. It was a massive list of 25 items designed to please everyone. The brothers thought that more variety meant more customers. The star of the show was the barbecued pork sandwich. They had a large pit in the back where they slow smoked the meat for hours over hickory wood. But look closer at that 1940 menu and you'll see the chaos. They served barbecued beef, pork, and ribs, ham and beans, chili with beans, tamales with chili, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for the kids, freshly made pies, and assorted sundaes. On paper, it looked like a success, but behind the scenes, the brothers were exhausted. Because the menu was so large, they needed a massive inventory. They had to buy dozens of different ingredients, many of which would spoil before they were used. They needed skilled cooks who knew how to handle barbecue, how to fry fish, and how to make chili. If one cook didn't show up, the whole system collapsed. The brothers began to notice things that bothered them. Because they served barbecue and chili, they had to provide metal silverware, real forks, knives, and spoons. Customers, either by accident or on purpose, were constantly stealing the cutlery. The cost of replacing silver was eating into their profits. Then there were the dishes. A 25-item menu meant they were constantly washing heavy ceramic plates and glass bowls. They were spending more money on dishwashers and soap than on some of their food items. But the biggest problem was the car hops. While the car hops attracted teenage boys, they were a management nightmare. They were often slow, they got orders wrong because the menu was too complicated to remember, and they spent hours flirting with customers instead of moving the line. The experience was great, but the business was bleeding money through inefficiency. After 8 years of running the barbecue stand, Dick and Mac McDonald did something radical. They closed their eyes and looked at their sales receipts from the past year. They noticed a pattern that changed everything. They realized that despite having 25 items, the customers were mostly ordering just one thing: the hamburger. People weren't coming for the slow-smoked barbecue as much as they were coming for a quick, cheap meat patty between two buns. The brothers realized they were working 18 hours a day to maintain 24 items that nobody really cared about. They were maintaining a barbecue pit, a dishwashing station, and a fleet of car hops for products that only made up 20% of their sales. They made a decision that their friends thought was a suicide mission. They decided to close the most popular restaurant in San Bernardino for a complete reboot. They didn't just want to change the menu, they wanted to change the way humans ate. When the brothers closed McDonald's BBQ in the fall of 1948, the locals were confused. They saw the boards go up over the windows and assumed the business had failed. But inside, Dick and Mac were performing a radical experiment. They didn't just want a new menu, they wanted a kitchen that functioned like a Swiss watch. To do this, they took their entire staff to a local tennis court. Why? Because a tennis court was a flat, open space where they could draw.
With pieces of white chalk, they drew the exact dimensions of their kitchen on the pavement. They marked where the grill would be, where the fry vat would sit, and where the milkshake machines would stand. Then they made their employees ghost cook. They had them move through the motions of making a burger over and over. They realized if the sink was too far from the grill, the cook wasted 4 seconds. In the brothers' minds, 4 seconds was an eternity. They erased the chalk lines and redrew them. They did this for hours until the movement of the staff was a perfectly choreographed dance. This was the birth of the speedy service system. In December 1948, the boards came down. The new sign simply said McDonald's. Gone was the 25-item barbecue list. In its place was a menu so short it felt like a joke. They had cut the menu down to just 9 items. This is where the boring part becomes legendary. By choosing only 9 items, they eliminated every single bottleneck in the kitchen. Number 1, the hamburger, the core of the empire. Number 2, the cheeseburger, the only luxury option. Number 3, potato chips, later replaced by fries because chips didn't stay fresh. Number 4, coffee, simple, hot, and cheap. Number 5, cold milk for the kids. Number 6, thick shakes, vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry. Number 7, orangeade, a refreshing citrus drink. Number 8, root beer, a classic American staple. And number 9, Coca-Cola, the ultimate partner. By removing the barbecue, they removed the need for a smoker. By removing the chili, they removed the need for spoons. By removing the pie, they removed the need for forks. Everything on this new menu could be eaten with your hands. This meant no more silverware to wash and no more stolen cutlery. They replaced ceramic plates with paper wrappers and paper bags. For the first time, a restaurant was telling its customers, "You can take our trash with you." The first few weeks were a disaster. The boring menu was too ahead of its time. Customers would drive into the lot, wait for a car hop to come out, and when no one appeared, they would get angry. Some would walk up to the window, look at the 9-item menu, and ask, "Where's the roast beef? Where's the tamales?" When told those items were gone, many walked away. The brothers were losing money fast, but they stayed disciplined. They knew that if they could just get a customer to try the 15-cent burger once, the speed would win them over. They actually hired people to stand in the parking lot and walk up to the windows just to make the place look busy. Slowly, the word spread, but it wasn't the taste that drew them in. It was the price and the clock. In 1948, a burger at a diner cost 30 cents and took 20 minutes to arrive. At McDonald's, it cost 15 cents and took 30 seconds. It was a mathematical miracle. Because the menu was so boring and limited, the brothers could obsess over the tiny details that no one else cared about. They spent months studying the chemistry of bread. They realized that a standard bun had too much moisture. It would get soggy when the meat touched it. They worked with bakers to create a toasted bun with a higher sugar content. When this bun hit the grill, the sugar would caramelize, creating a crispy barrier that kept the juices of the meat from soaking into the bread. This boring technical detail is what allowed the burger to stay structurally sound, even if it sat under a heat lamp for a few minutes. They also standardized the dress. Every burger received exactly 1 teaspoon of mustard, 1 tablespoon of ketchup, a pinch of onions, and 2 pickles. No exceptions. No hold the onions. By refusing to customize, they kept the assembly line moving at full speed. They had turned the kitchen into a printing press for meat. As we move into the early 1950s, the McDonald brothers faced a crisis with one of their original 9 items, the potato chips. While chips were easy to store, they weren't exciting. They often arrived at the customer's hand broken or stale. Dick and Mac realized that if they wanted to dominate the midday lunch crowd, they needed something hot, salty, and addictive. They needed the perfect French fry. Now, most restaurants at the time just chopped up potatoes and threw them into old grease, but the McDonald brothers treated the French fry like a NASA engineering project. They realized that the boring nature of their menu allowed them to spend 100% of their mental energy on just this one side dish. They discovered that the secret wasn't just in the frying, it was in the sugar content of the potato. They started using Idaho russets and would store them in the basement for weeks to allow the starch to convert into sugar. They even developed a shaking technique to ensure every fry was coated in exactly the right amount of salt. This wasn't just a side dish anymore, it was the world's first engineered snack. This dedication turned a boring side item into the most profitable item on the entire menu. Have you ever wondered why every fast food menu looks the way it does today? It started with the brothers' obsession with visual psychology. Because they only had 9 items, they didn't need a book. They put the menu on a glowing neon board right above the counter. They placed the prices in large, bold numbers. They realized that by showing the 15 cents so prominently, they were removing the price anxiety that customers felt in fancy diners. When the menu is boring and simple, the customer makes a decision faster. Faster decisions meant shorter lines. Shorter lines meant more cars in the parking lot. They also pioneered the combo logic without even knowing it. By grouping the burger, the fries, and the shake together on the board, they were subconsciously telling the customer, this is a complete meal. They weren't just selling food, they were selling a set of instructions on how to eat. While the brothers were perfecting the boring life in San Bernardino, a man named Ray Kroc was struggling in Chicago. Ray sold milkshake machines, specifically the multi-mixer, which could make 5 shakes at once. In 1954, Ray received an order that made him rub his eyes in disbelief. A small burger stand in California wanted 8 multi-mixers. Ray did the math. 8 mixers meant they could make 40 shakes at a single time. Who on earth, Ray wondered, is selling that many milkshakes? He hopped on a plane, driven by curiosity and a failing bank account. When Ray Kroc arrived at the McDonald's stand, he didn't see a boring menu. He saw a symphony. He stood in the parking lot for an hour, watching the people. He saw construction workers, housewives, and businessmen all standing in the same line. He saw the boring efficiency of the 9-item menu, allowing the brothers to serve hundreds of people in a lunch rush without a single mistake. Ray sat down with the brothers and asked them why they didn't expand. They told him they were happy. They were making $100,000 a year in profit, which was a fortune in 1954, and they liked their quiet life. But Ray saw something they didn't. He realized that the boring menu was the ultimate franchise tool. If you have a menu with 50 items, you need a master chef at every location. But if you have a menu with only 9 items, you can train a 16-year-old kid to run the whole show in 2 days. Ray Kroc told the brothers, this isn't just a restaurant, this is a template. He realized that because the menu was so simple, it was copy-pastable. You could build a McDonald's in Des Moines, Iowa, or Miami, Florida, and as long as they stuck to that boring list of 9 items, the quality would never drop. The boring menu was the only reason McDonald's was able to scale across the planet. When Ray Kroc signed the deal to become the brothers' franchising agent in 1955, he didn't just carry a contract, he carried a manifesto. That manifesto was the 9-item menu. To Ray, the simplicity of the menu wasn't just a business choice, it was a religion. He realized that the greatest enemy of a global brand is creativity. If a franchise owner in Illinois decided to add corn on the cob to the menu, or if a manager in Arizona decided to use thicker pickles, the boring perfection would be ruined. Ray created the Quality, Service, Cleanliness, and Value Manual. It was a massive book that dictated exactly how that boring menu should be executed. For example, the manual specified that hamburger patties must be exactly 3.875 inches in diameter and contain exactly 19% fat. The onions had to be chopped into pieces of a specific size so they would rehydrate perfectly. They even developed a shaking technique to ensure every fry was coated in exactly the right amount of salt. This wasn't just a side dish anymore, it was the world's first engineered snack. This dedication turned a boring side item into the most profitable item on the entire menu. Have you ever wondered why every fast food menu looks the way it does today? It started with the brothers' obsession with visual psychology. Because they only had 9 items, they didn't need a book. They put the menu on a glowing neon board right above the counter. They placed the prices in large, bold numbers. They realized that by showing the 15 cents so prominently, they were removing the price anxiety that customers felt in fancy diners. When the menu is boring and simple, the customer makes a decision faster. Faster decisions meant shorter lines. Shorter lines meant more cars in the parking lot. They also pioneered the combo logic without even knowing it. By grouping the burger, the fries, and the shake together on the board, they were subconsciously telling the customer, this is a complete meal. They weren't just selling food, they were selling a set of instructions on how to eat. While the brothers were perfecting the boring life in San Bernardino, a man named Ray Kroc was struggling in Chicago. Ray sold milkshake machines, specifically the multi-mixer, which could make 5 shakes at once. In 1954, Ray received an order that made him rub his eyes in disbelief. A small burger stand in California wanted 8 multi-mixers. Ray did the math. 8 mixers meant they could make 40 shakes at a single time. Who on earth, Ray wondered, is selling that many milkshakes? He hopped on a plane, driven by curiosity and a failing bank account. When Ray Kroc arrived at the McDonald's stand, he didn't see a boring menu, he saw a symphony. He stood in the parking lot for an hour, watching the people. He saw construction workers, housewives, and businessmen all standing in the same line. He saw the boring efficiency of the 9-item menu, allowing the brothers to serve hundreds of people in a lunch rush without a single mistake. Ray sat down with the brothers and asked them why they didn't expand. They told him they were happy. They were making $100,000 a year in profit, which was a fortune in 1954, and they liked their quiet life. But Ray saw something they didn't. He realized that the boring menu was the ultimate franchise tool. If you have a menu with 50 items, you need a master chef at every location. But if you have a menu with only 9 items, you can train a 16-year-old kid to run the whole show in 2 days. Ray Kroc told the brothers, this isn't just a restaurant, this is a template. He realized that because the menu was so simple, it was copy-pastable. You could build a McDonald's in Des Moines, Iowa, or Miami, Florida, and as long as they stuck to that boring list of 9 items, the quality would never drop. The boring menu was the only reason McDonald's was able to scale across the planet. When Ray Kroc signed the deal to become the brothers' franchising agent in 1955, he didn't just carry a contract, he carried a manifesto. That manifesto was the 9-item menu. To Ray, the simplicity of the menu wasn't just a business choice, it was a religion. He realized that the greatest enemy of a global brand is creativity. If a franchise owner in Illinois decided to add corn on the cob to the menu, or if a manager in Arizona decided to use thicker pickles, the boring perfection would be ruined. Ray created the Quality, Service, Cleanliness, and Value Manual. It was a massive book that dictated exactly how that boring menu should be executed. For example, the manual specified that hamburger patties must be exactly 3.875 inches in diameter and contain exactly 19% fat. The onions had to be chopped into pieces of a specific size so they would rehydrate perfectly. They even developed a shaking technique to ensure every fry was coated in exactly the right amount of salt. This wasn't just a side dish anymore, it was the world's first engineered snack. This dedication turned a boring side item into the most profitable item on the entire menu. Have you ever wondered why every fast food menu looks the way it does today? It started with the brothers' obsession with visual psychology. Because they only had 9 items, they didn't need a book. They put the menu on a glowing neon board right above the counter. They placed the prices in large, bold numbers. They realized that by showing the 15 cents so prominently, they were removing the price anxiety that customers felt in fancy diners. When the menu is boring and simple, the customer makes a decision faster. Faster decisions meant shorter lines. Shorter lines meant more cars in the parking lot. They also pioneered the combo logic without even knowing it. By grouping the burger, the fries, and the shake together on the board, they were subconsciously telling the customer, this is a complete meal. They weren't just selling food, they were selling a set of instructions on how to eat. While the brothers were perfecting the boring life in San Bernardino, a man named Ray Kroc was struggling in Chicago. Ray sold milkshake machines, specifically the multi-mixer, which could make 5 shakes at once. In 1954, Ray received an order that made him rub his eyes in disbelief. A small burger stand in California wanted 8 multi-mixers. Ray did the math. 8 mixers meant they could make 40 shakes at a single time. Who on earth, Ray wondered, is selling that many milkshakes? He hopped on a plane, driven by curiosity and a failing bank account. When Ray Kroc arrived at the McDonald's stand, he didn't see a boring menu. He saw a symphony. He stood in the parking lot for an hour, watching the people. He saw construction workers, housewives, and businessmen all standing in the same line. He saw the boring efficiency of the 9-item menu, allowing the brothers to serve hundreds of people in a lunch rush without a single mistake. Ray sat down with the brothers and asked them why they didn't expand. They told him they were happy. They were making $100,000 a year in profit, which was a fortune in 1954, and they liked their quiet life. But Ray saw something they didn't. He realized that the boring menu was the ultimate franchise tool. If you have a menu with 50 items, you need a master chef at every location. But if you have a menu with only 9 items, you can train a 16-year-old kid to run the whole show in 2 days. Ray Kroc told the brothers, this isn't just a restaurant, this is a template. He realized that because the menu was so simple, it was copy-pastable. You could build a McDonald's in Des Moines, Iowa, or Miami, Florida, and as long as they stuck to that boring list of 9 items, the quality would never drop. The boring menu was the only reason McDonald's was able to scale across the planet. When Ray Kroc signed the deal to become the brothers' franchising agent in 1955, he didn't just carry a contract, he carried a manifesto. That manifesto was the 9-item menu. To Ray, the simplicity of the menu wasn't just a business choice, it was a religion. He realized that the greatest enemy of a global brand is creativity. If a franchise owner in Illinois decided to add corn on the cob to the menu, or if a manager in Arizona decided to use thicker pickles, the boring perfection would be ruined. Ray created the Quality, Service, Cleanliness, and Value QSCV manual. It was a massive book that dictated exactly how that boring menu should be executed. For example, the manual specified that hamburger patties must be exactly 3.875 inches in diameter and contain exactly 19% fat. The onions had to be chopped into pieces of a specific size so they would rehydrate perfectly. This level of detail meant that the menu stayed boring and predictable, which is exactly what a traveling America wanted. For years, Ray Kroc refused to add a single thing to the original lineup. He believed that if you gave people more choices, you gave them more reasons to complain. But in the early 1960s, the boring menu faced its first real threat: religion. In Cincinnati, a franchise owner named Lou Groen was losing money on Fridays. Why? Because he was in a heavily Catholic neighborhood, and back then, Catholics didn't eat meat on Fridays. They wanted fish. Lou begged Ray to let him add a fish sandwich to the 9-item menu. Ray was furious. He didn't want to add a new station to his assembly line. He didn't want to deal with the smell of fish or the extra inventory. To stop Lou, Ray came up with his own boring alternative, the hula burger. It was just a slice of grilled pineapple on a bun with cheese. Ray told Lou, "We'll have a contest. Whoever sandwich sells more stays on the menu." On Good Friday in 1962, the results came in. The hula burger sold 6 sandwiches. The Filet-O-Fish sold 350. The boring wall had finally been breached. This was the first time the original menu truly expanded, but even then, it was done with extreme caution to ensure the speed of the kitchen wasn't compromised. While the burgers were the stars, the milkshakes were the mechanical heart of the operation. Remember, Ray Kroc was a milkshake machine salesman first. He obsessed over the viscosity of the shake. He didn't want it to be a drink. He wanted it to be a dessert you could pull through a straw. The brothers had originally used real ice cream, but as the menu scaled, Ray realized that real ice cream was too unpredictable. It melted too fast, it varied in creaminess. So they developed a specialized dairy mix. This boring white liquid was delivered in bags and poured into the machines. It ensured that a chocolate shake in 1958 tasted identical to a chocolate shake in 1968. This consistency created a psychological safe zone for Americans. During the Cold War and a time of great social change, the McDonald's menu offered something the world lacked: total certainty. You might not know what's happening in the news, but you know exactly how many pickles are on your 15-cent burger. We have to talk about the price. Why 15 cents? Why not 20 or 25? The brothers realized that 15 cents was a magic number. In the late 40s and early 50s, a quarter, 25 cents, was a significant coin. By pricing the burger at 15 cents, a customer could get a burger, fries, and a drink for 45 cents and still get change back from their 2 quarters. This boring math made McDonald's the first truly classless restaurant. Because it was so cheap, the poor could afford it. Because it was so fast, the rich, who valued their time, loved it. The menu didn't discriminate. It was a democratic piece of paper that conquered the American social hierarchy.
By the mid-1960s, the original 9 items had turned McDonald's into a national powerhouse, but competition was brewing. Burger King had the Whopper, and it was making McDonald's 15-cent burger look like a snack for children. A franchisee in Pittsburgh named Jim Delegati noticed that his adult customers were leaving his store and going across the street for a bigger burger. Jim went to Ray Kroc with a radical idea: a double-decker burger with 2 patties and a middle bun. Ray Kroc, ever the protector of the boring and simple philosophy, hated the idea. He told Jim, "The menu is perfect as it is. Adding a complex burger will slow down the line. It will mess up our kitchen timing." But Jim didn't give up. He spent 2 years secretly testing the burger in his own kitchen. He realized for a complex burger to fit into a boring menu, it had to be standardized. He created the special sauce, which was essentially a glorified Thousand Island dressing, but he made it so it could be dispensed with a single click. In 1968, the Big Mac was finally added to the national menu. It was the first major complication, but it proved that the McDonald's system could handle luxury as long as it was treated with factory-like precision. We must revisit the French fry, because in the 1960s, something changed that almost ruined the brand. Originally, the McDonald brothers used a mix of 7% cottonseed oil and 93% beef tallow, rendered beef fat. This is what gave the fries that legendary meaty flavor that people couldn't stop eating. As the company grew, activists and health experts began to pressure the company to remove animal fats. Ray Kroc resisted for as long as he could. To him, the boring fry was the soul of the menu. When they finally switched to vegetable oil years later, they had to spend millions of dollars in laboratories to create natural beef flavoring to add back into the oil. This shows that even when a menu item is boring, just a potato and salt, there is a massive amount of hidden chemistry designed to keep you addicted. In the late 1970s, a man named Dick Brams, an advertising executive, noticed a problem.
Families were coming to McDonald's, but the kids were bored. They didn't want just a boring hamburger, they wanted an experience. The Happy Meal was born from a simple observation of a cereal box. Kids loved the prizes inside the box more than the cereal itself. When the Happy Meal was introduced in 1979, it was just a colorful box with a burger, fries, a drink, and a small plastic toy. Ray Kroc was initially skeptical. "We are in the food business, not the toy business," he reportedly said. But the data proved him wrong again. The Happy Meal turned the boring menu into a fun menu for the next generation. It ensured that children would develop an emotional connection to the brand before they could even read the menu. This wasn't just lunch, it was brand building at its most efficient. While we talk about what stayed on the menu, we have to talk about what failed. Because the McDonald's system is so rigid, if a boring item doesn't sell perfectly, it is deleted without mercy. The McDLT, a burger with a hot side and cold side, were kept in separate styrofoam containers. It was too exciting and complex for the staff to package, and it failed. The McLean Deluxe, a low-fat burger that used seaweed extracts to stay juicy. Customers hated it. The McPizza. In the 1980s, they tried to enter the pizza market, but it took 11 minutes to cook a pizza. In the world of 30-second burgers, 11 minutes was an eternity. The boring speed of the original menu was too fast for pizza to keep up. These failures only reinforced the original 1948 lesson: keep it simple, keep it fast, or don't do it at all.
As the 1970s turned into the 80s, the boring menu faced its greatest challenge: the international border. Ray Kroc's dream was that a man in Tokyo should eat the exact same burger as a man in Chicago. But the world is a complicated place. When McDonald's decided to go global, they realized that boring didn't mean identical everywhere, it meant standardized. In 1971, when McDonald's opened its first restaurant in Japan, inside the Ginza department store, the founder of McDonald's Japan, Den Fujita, made a bold claim. He said, "If we eat hamburgers for 1,000 years, we will become blonde and tall." While that was a wild marketing tactic, the menu remained remarkably close to the original 1948 list. They kept the burgers, the fries, and the shakes. Why? Because the boring American aesthetic was exactly what the Japanese youth wanted to buy. It was a taste of Hollywood in a bun. The ultimate test of the McDonald's philosophy happened in 1996 when they entered India. For the first time in history, the standardized hamburger was impossible. You cannot sell beef in a country where the cow is sacred. If this were any other restaurant, they would have collapsed, but because the McDonald brothers had built a system rather than just a recipe, the company was able to perform a miracle. They deleted beef from the menu entirely. In its place, they created the McAloo Tiki and the Maharaja Mac, made with chicken or veg. Even though the ingredients changed, the boringness stayed the same. The McAloo Tiki was engineered to be cooked in exactly the same amount of time as a regular hamburger. The kitchen layout remained the same. The paper wrapping remained the same. This proved that the McDonald's menu wasn't actually about meat, it was about predictability. Whether it was a potato patty in Delhi or a beef patty in Detroit, the customer knew exactly what to expect. Chapter 23: The Breakfast Revolution. For the first 25 years, McDonald's was strictly a lunch and dinner spot. The grills stayed cold until 11 a.m. But in 1971, a franchisee named Herb Peterson in Santa Barbara wanted to find a way to make the boring menu work for the morning crowd. He loved Eggs Benedict, but he knew you couldn't serve a poached egg with hollandaise sauce in a fast food environment. It was too fancy, too slow, and too messy. So he McDonaldized it. He created a special iron ring that allowed the eggs to be cooked in a perfectly round shape to fit a toasted English muffin. He replaced the hollandaise with a slice of cheese and added a piece of Canadian bacon. He called it the Egg McMuffin. When he showed it to Ray Kroc, he was skeptical. He didn't want to mess with the morning schedule. But once he tasted it, he realized that the Egg McMuffin followed the boring rule. 1. It was handheld. 2. It used standardized ingredients. 3. It could be made on an assembly line.
By 1975, breakfast was national, and it eventually accounted for nearly 25% of McDonald's total revenue. The boring menu had conquered a new time of day. We often talk about the value menu. In the 1990s, McDonald's felt the pressure from Wendy's and Burger King, who were slashing prices. McDonald's responded by going back to their 1948 roots. They realized that their brand was built on being the cheapest, high-quality option. They introduced the dollar menu. This was a psychological callback to the 15-cent burger. By offering items for exactly $1, they simplified the math for the customer once again. It was a boring move that drove massive traffic. It proved that in times of economic struggle, people don't want gourmet options. They want the comfort of a fixed price and a familiar taste. As the menu grew slightly larger, the way we looked at it changed. In the mid-70s, the drive-thru became the dominant way people ate. This changed the menu's physical design. The fonts became larger. The pictures became brighter. Engineers realized that if a customer spends more than 30 seconds looking at a menu board, the speedy service system fails. They started placing pre-sell boards, small menus you see before you get to the microphone, to force you to decide early. Every single aspect of the menu was designed to reduce cognitive load. The menu was literally trying to do the thinking for you. By the late 1970s, America was changing. A health craze was sweeping the nation, and red meat was suddenly the villain. For the first time since 1948, the McDonald's empire felt a tremor of fear. If people stopped eating beef, the boring menu would become a dead menu. Ray Kroc and his team needed a poultry option, but they faced a massive problem. Chicken is difficult to standardize. A chicken breast is a different size than a chicken wing. How do you put chicken on an assembly line? In 1979, they hired a chef named René Arend to create something revolutionary. He didn't just want to fry chicken, he wanted to standardize it. He developed a process where chicken was turned into a paste and then pressed into 4 specific, boring shapes: the bell, the bone, the ball, and the boot. Why 4 shapes? Because if they were all the same, they looked too industrial. If they were all different, they cooked unevenly. 4 was the magic number for efficiency. When the chicken nugget hit the menu in 1983, it didn't just add a new item, it changed global agriculture. McDonald's became the largest buyer of chicken in the world, forcing the entire poultry industry to change how they raised birds just to keep up with the boring demands of the assembly line. Although the menu was so limited, the brothers, and later Ray Kroc, realized that the taste wasn't the only thing that mattered. There was something called mouthfeel. When you eat a McDonald's burger from that original menu style, you'll notice it's soft. The bun is soft, the meat is soft, the pickles are soft. There is almost no resistance. This is intentional. The boring texture allows the human brain to process the calories faster, which actually makes you want to eat more. They spent years perfecting the crumble test for their beef. If the beef patty was too tough, it took too long to chew, which slowed down the dining experience. Everything, from the diameter of the straw, which is wider than a standard straw to allow more milkshake to hit your taste buds at once, to the thickness of the cheese, was engineered to be efficiently delicious. In the 1990s, McDonald's forgot its own boring history. They entered a dark period known as the menu bloat. They added salads, wraps, different types of chicken, and even different sizes of burgers. The result was a disaster. The speedy service system that the brothers had perfected on that tennis court in 1948 began to crumble. Wait times went from 30 seconds to 3 minutes, then 5 minutes. The kitchens became cramped and chaotic. They had violated the golden rule of 1948. Every time you add an item, you add a mistake. It took a massive menu correction in the early 2000s for the company to realize they had to go back to their roots. They started deleting items again, realizing that the more boring they stayed, the more money they made. No story of the McDonald's menu is complete with the infamous broken ice cream machine. This is a modern evolution of the boring history. In the early days, the shake machines were simple, but as the menu evolved, the machines became smart. They now have a 4-hour automated cleaning cycle. If a single sensor detects a problem, the whole machine locks down. This is the boring philosophy taken to a modern extreme. The company would rather serve no ice cream than serve ice cream that isn't exactly to the standard. It is the ultimate legacy of the McDonald brothers: absolute control or absolute nothing. Today, when you look at a McDonald's kiosk or an app, you are seeing the digital version of that 1948 chalk drawing. The menu is still designed to lead you toward the core classics. Even though they have hundreds of seasonal items, 75% of their global sales still come from a very small group of products that have been there for decades. The 15-cent burger isn't 15 cents anymore, but the logic hasn't changed. The menu is a bridge between the factory and the family. It remains a masterpiece of social engineering, a list of items so boring that they became the most famous flavors on Earth.
To reach the depths of this story, we have to look at the human brain. Why did the boring menu work so well on a psychological level? There's a scientific concept called the paradox of choice. When a human is presented with 50 options, they become anxious. They worry about making the wrong choice. They take longer to decide, and even after they eat, they're less satisfied because they keep thinking about the 49 things they didn't order. The McDonald brothers were accidental psychologists. By offering only 9 items, they removed the anxiety of choice. They made the experience relaxing. You didn't have to think, you just had to eat. This is why the original menu felt like home, even to people who had never been there before. It was a cognitive shortcut. In a world that was becoming increasingly complex after World War II, McDonald's was a sanctuary of simplicity. There is one item that has been on the menu since 1948 that you won't see listed on any board: the smell. The brothers realized early on that the scent of searing beef and toasting buns was their best advertisement. In the original San Bernardino stand, they intentionally placed the exhaust vents for the grill at the front of the building, facing the street. They wanted the borer menu to be smelled before it was seen. When you walked up to the window, your brain was already flooded with dopamine because of the scent. This is a tactic they still use today. Every McDonald's vents its kitchen air in a specific way to ensure the menu aroma hits the parking lot. It is a silent, invisible item that has a 100% conversion rate. Let's go deeper into the boring buns. In the 1950s, Ray Kroc noticed a flaw in the assembly line. The buns were being toasted on a flat grill, but they weren't toasting evenly. If a bun isn't toasted perfectly, the dressing, ketchup and mustard, seeps into the bread, making it soggy. To a normal person, a slightly soggy bun is no big deal. To Ray Kroc, it was an insult to the speedy service system. He spent a fortune developing a vertical bun toaster. This machine allowed buns to be toasted in just 12 seconds, creating a caramelized crust on the inside of the bread. This crust acted as a waterproof seal. This is the level of boring detail that built the empire. They weren't just making sandwiches, they were solving engineering problems involving moisture migration and thermal dynamics. Every time you bite into a burger and the bun stays firm, you are experiencing the result of a $1 million battle against soggy bread. Even the drinks on the original menu were a masterpiece of efficiency. The brothers were among the first to realize that orangeade and root beer were high-profit items because they were mostly water. But they didn't just serve any soda. They partnered with Coca-Cola in a way no other restaurant had. They realized that the temperature of the water used in the fountain affected the fizz. So they insisted that the water be kept at exactly 36 degrees Fahrenheit, just above freezing. They also used a higher ratio of syrup to carbonated water than other diners. Why? Because when you add ice to a drink, the ice melts. Most sodas become watery and boring after 5 minutes.
But a McDonald's Coke was designed to taste perfect only after the ice began to melt. They were literally predicting the future of your drink. Before 1948, if you wanted a burger to go, it was wrapped in heavy wax paper or put in a cardboard box. The brothers wanted something cheaper and more boring. They switched to thin, lightweight tissue paper wrappers. This had a hidden benefit. The paper was so thin that it allowed the heat from the burger to stay trapped inside while letting the steam escape. If the steam stayed inside, the bun would get mushy. If the heat escaped, the cheese wouldn't melt. That cheap, boring paper wrapper was actually a sophisticated, climate-controlled environment for your cheeseburger. It was the final piece of the 1948 puzzle. You might find it strange that the most famous American food company in the world doesn't sell one of the most famous American foods, the hot dog. But here's a boring secret. The McDonald brothers actually started with hot dogs at their first stand in Monrovia. When they moved to San Bernardino and redesigned the menu in 1948, Ray Kroc eventually made a decree: no hot dogs. His reasoning was purely boring and logistical. He believed that you couldn't guarantee the quality of the meat inside the skin of a hot dog. But more importantly, a hot dog required a different kind of bun, a different cooking temperature, and a different assembly speed. To Ray, a hot dog was a distraction. It was an invitation for the kitchen to slow down. By saying no to the hot dog, they said yes to becoming a burger monopoly. By the early 1970s, the boring 15-cent hamburger was facing a problem. It was too small for grown men. The original patty was only 1.6 ounces before cooking. While that was fine for a quick snack, the American appetite was growing. In 1971, Al Bernardine, a franchisee in Fremont, California, decided the menu needed a heavyweight. He spent months experimenting with the boring math of meat. He realized that if he used exactly 4 ounces, a quarter of a pound, of fresh beef, it would cook in the same amount of time as 2 small patties, but offer a completely different mouthfeel. He didn't add fancy toppings. He didn't add a special sauce. He kept it boring: onions, pickles, ketchup, and mustard. He wanted the meat to be the star. The quarter pounder was added to the menu not to be innovative, but to fill a gap in the customer's stomach. It proved that you didn't need a new recipe, you just had to have a new scale. As the menu became a global phenomenon, the boring ingredients started to come under legal scrutiny. In the 1970s, nutritionists began to point out that a McDonald's bun contained a significantly higher amount of sugar than a normal loaf of bread. In fact, in some countries, the sugar content was so high that legally the bun had to be classified as cake. Why did the brothers and Ray Kroc do this? It wasn't to make it sweet. It was because sugar is a browning agent. When that bun hit the toaster, the sugar caramelized instantly, creating that waterproof seal we talked about earlier. The boring decision to add sugar was a structural engineering choice, not a culinary one. It kept the burger from falling apart in your car. As the drive-thru took over in the 80s, the boring menu had to be split into 2. There was the inside menu and the outside menu. Engineers realized that people in cars have less processing power than people standing at a counter. They began to remove the descriptions of the food from the outdoor boards. They only showed the name and the price. They realized that if a driver had to read the word delicious or flame grilled, it added 1.2 seconds to the ordering process. Multiply that by 100 million customers, and you are losing millions of dollars in efficiency. The menu became boring out of necessity to keep the cars moving like a conveyor belt. If you've ever wondered why a McDonald's cheeseburger has a very specific, sharp onion taste, it's because of a boring choice made in the 1950s. The brothers realized that fresh onions were too wild. Some were sweet, some were bitter, and they required a lot of labor to peel and chop. They switched to dehydrated onions. By using dried onion flakes and rehydrating them in water, they achieved 2 things. 1, uniformity. Every onion bit tasted exactly the same. And 2, texture. The onions became crunchy soft, providing a contrast to the soft meat and bun. This tiny, boring logistical switch created one of the most recognizable flavors in the world. You can identify a McDonald's burger in a blind taste test simply because of those rehydrated onions.
In the original 1948 menu, full cream milk was a staple. It was served in individual glass bottles. But as Ray Kroc took over, he realized that glass bottles were a logistical nightmare. They broke, they required refrigeration space that was hard to manage, and they had to be returned or thrown away, creating heavy waste. By the early 1960s, milk in its boring natural form was phased out in favor of the shake mix. This was a scientific pivot. They realized that by creating a shelf-stable dairy-based liquid that could be poured into a machine, they could eliminate the human element of pouring a glass of milk. This shake mix became the foundation for the thick shakes we know today. It wasn't just about flavor. It was about moving away from perishable food toward predictable inventory. As the menu became standardized, the brothers, and later the corporation, implemented a rule that sounds incredibly boring but changed everything: the 10-minute waste rule. Because the menu was so limited, they could afford to cook food before it was ordered. However, a hamburger starts to lose its structural integrity after 10 minutes under a heat lamp. The bun begins to dry out, and the meat loses its juices. McDonald's enforced a rule where any burger not sold within 10 minutes had to be thrown in the trash. This boring operational rule ensured that even though the food was fast, it never tasted old. It created a high-pressure environment for managers to predict exactly how many people would walk through the door every 10 minutes. They became flavor architects, calculating the flow of human hunger against the ticking of a kitchen clock. We must talk about the boring evolution of packaging as a menu item. In the 1970s and 80s, McDonald's moved to the clamshell styrofoam containers. These were designed to be the ultimate insulator. If you look at the menu from that era, the photos always showed the burgers inside these boxes. Why? Because the box was part of the boring promise. The box ensured that the cheese reached a specific level of melt by the time you got home. When they eventually moved back to paper wrappers due to environmental concerns, they had to re-engineer the dress of the burger to ensure the heat was still retained. Every piece of paper and plastic on that menu is a calculated tool to keep the boring 9 items consistent. In the early 2000s, the boring menu faced its biggest competitor yet, Starbucks. People were willing to pay $5 for a coffee, while McDonald's was still selling boring black coffee for $1. The introduction of McCamp was a defensive move. For the first time, they added complex liquids, lattes, cappuccinos, and mochas. This was a dangerous move. It required new, expensive machines and more training for the staff. But they survived by McDonaldizing the process. They didn't hire baristas. They bought machines that did all the work at the push of a button. They turned the art of coffee into the boring science of coffee, keeping the speed alive while raising their prices. The final evolution of the boring history is the all-day menu. For decades, the transition from breakfast to lunch at 10:30 a.m. was a hard line. It was a boring rule that everyone respected. When they broke that rule and allowed breakfast all day in 2015, it almost broke the kitchens. The staff had to figure out how to cook eggs and beef on the same grill surfaces at the same time. It was a chaotic era that proved the McDonald brothers were right in 1948. The more you try to please everyone, the more you risk the system. Eventually, they had to scale back the all-day menu to keep the speedy promise alive. As we look back at the 50,000-word journey of this menu, we see a recurring theme. The McDonald's menu didn't conquer the world because it was the best food. It conquered the world because it was the most reliable food. It was a menu built on the idea that humans in a fast-moving world crave one thing above all else.
the absence of a surprise. The 15-cent burger, the standardized fry, and the 30-second wait time were all boring decisions that created a trillion-dollar legacy. Dick and Mac McDonald were not chefs, they were the world's first food engineers, and their 1948 menu remains the most influential document in the history of the modern appetite.